When you think of the best competitive Call of Duty games of all time, there's no doubt about it that Black Ops 2 is one of the first things that you think about. In this video, I want to take a look back at one of the matches from Champs and really diagnose what made those games so great. Was it the map design? Was it the gun balance? Was it the spawn system? What was it that has everybody thinking back to the old Call of Duty games and why they were so great? Was it just nostalgia? But with that, let's go ahead, let's get right into the gameplay. Bottom left, you can see we are on board with Optic Big Timer, so that gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of how old this is overall. The Optic squad, this is just that OG squad of Big Timer, Merc, Nadeshot, and Scump. When you're looking at the NV roster, JCat, Proofy, Rambo, and Stainville. So these guys really are just legends in the scene, and it's really when the scene overall started to pick up popularity. But as we go ahead and hit pause here, the first thing I want to talk about is just the map design. We'll talk about the spawning system and how it's different from the squad spawns that we had in Modern Warfare in just a moment. But if you're looking at just this overall, you can see now it's not exactly how everybody likes. When everybody thinks of classic map design, they think of an H, right? 3 lanes with a way to get in between each of those lanes through the middle. That's kind of what we have. It's just a little bit diagonal. So you do have your route down the middle, you have your top lane, you have your bottom lane, and there's a way to get between all 3 of those lanes, right? So it's not perfectly symmetrical in an H form like most people would have it. And then as you get towards the top, as you get towards the bottom, obviously you can run through each of those lanes at the edges. So this is that classic map design, and a lot of the maps in this that were competitive were like this. If you're looking at Raid, that's another map where you had a lane down the middle, lane down the left over by pool, lane down the right over by statue. You could cut through the middle courtyard area, and when you got back behind by the basketball court and by the garage, it was set up just like this. And the biggest thing, Slums was also this way, but the biggest thing is that it didn't take too long to get from one lane to the other. It didn't take too long to get from one back spawn to the middle of the map. Whereas if you're looking at like a St. Petrograd, think of how big that map was in comparison to what you're watching now. So let's go ahead, let's get back into this and watch some of the gameplay. While we're watching this, the other thing that I want to talk about is just how balanced all the guns were, and they had many options to choose from. This one that you're going to see in most of the SMG's hands, like what you see with Scump right here, is the MSMC. That was kind of the jack of all trades. I guess you could compare it to the MP5 of today's Modern Warfare game, but you could also use a Scorpion. So a Scorpion did a little bit less damage, but had a super high fire rate. When it came to ARs, you could use the AN94 if you liked, kind of like an M4, or there was the M8, which was a 4-round burst gun that was super viable. You're going to see the main ARs in this one using that weapon, but it was just different because if you were an AR and you were playing faster, you could use the AN94. If you were an M4 and you were playing a little bit slower, you're being that anchoring AR, you could go ahead and you could use the M8. But right now, the other thing that I want to point out real quick so that we're not a little bit lost is where the hardpoint locations were. So when it came to standoff, 1 was right in the middle of the map. As you went from 1 to 2, 2 is on the right-hand side, which is exactly where we're at right now. The third hardpoint was back on the opposite side. And then 4th was on the north side of the map. So there wasn't a 5th hardpoint location. If this was today's game, you might see a 5th hardpoint location over here on this left side. So then you're kind of utilizing each side of the map. But in this one, there were only 4, which is why as it rotated from P1 to P2, or the first location to the second, that's why this top part of the map over here was so important. Because if you were getting spawned on the top side of the map, you could get inside of P2 much easier, which is exactly what you're seeing right now. So even though the colors are a little bit off, you can see that Envy is getting those top spawns. So they're the orange squad. So they're getting these spawns, which is why it was so easy for them to get inside of P2. Now, as it rotates here in 30 seconds over to P3, Optic is going to be getting these spawns because they're going to be on the opposite side. So as we go through and watch this, pay attention to the spawns and how unforgiving they are. That's one of the things that I want to talk about, is that as soon as you start to get pushed, look at where teams are spawning. So again, Optic was spawning over here by P3. They hit the bottom side of the map, the right side of the map, to get over by gas station to get to P2. And as soon as that happened, if this was Modern Warfare, they would be spawning right here, right? Think about P2 on Hackney Yard. If you have P2 control, you're going to spawn right beside it. But since there's pressure on the hardpoint, the game isn't going to place Envy in a location that's close to P2. They take them, they spawn them out. So now it takes much longer for them to get back inside the hardpoint and contest. And if everybody goes down inside of P2, it's going to take those spawns. It's going to put them even further out on the left-hand side of the map. So that's one of the big difference here, is that it doesn't reward you just by gaining rotations. You really do have to get kills inside of the hardpoint. Now, as we get on board with JCap here, JCap is one of those anchoring ARs, which is why he had that M8. He didn't end up winning that gun battle, which is why he completely spawned out. Even though things were fluid inside of that hardpoint, the game didn't recognize who had control of that hardpoint, so it spawned them out on the opposite side of the map. And now this is very similar to what you see inside of like P2 on Gunrunner, in that if it gets contested and there's a lot of people around the hardpoint, it's going to take one team, spawn them on the top side of the map, take another team, spawn them on the bottom side of the map, and it's just going to be super contested. Nice two-piece right there from JCap through the wall, but you can see, I think they're going to bring up the minimap in just a moment, but yeah, so this is exactly what's happening. There's a lot of contesting going on inside the hardpoint. So while that's happening, it's taking those Envy players, even though we just saw JCap inside the hardpoint. If this was Modern Warfare, they'd be spawning right here. But it's contested. So they take those orange arrows, spawn them off to the right. They take those optic arrows and they spawn them over to the left. And now both teams basically have an equal distance to get back inside of P3. The other thing I want to talk about when it comes to Black Ops 2 is that rotations are super important. So with P4 being back on the opposite side of the map, when JCap comes up off spawn, right now there's 30 seconds left in the current hardpoint. So he can either elect to go back towards P3 or he can rotate over to try to get position inside of P4. We'll see what he does, but if it was my guess would be that he would begin to rotate. So again, you see it, you can see the arrows in the right-hand side of the map. He comes up off spawn. They are immediately rotating over, and they're essentially going to be the team that ends up winning that rotation unless they get slayed out, right? Look at Big T in the bottom right. Look at how young he looks. He looks like a kid. He looks like a child. Man, this is really weird to watch. But now it's about to rotate over to P4, and now the battle inside of P4 is on. Which team is going to get these critical kills? Another thing that I like about this is that there's really only nice two-piece there from Big Timer. So I wish that we could see the minimap. I love that we're watching Big T, but Big Timer was able to get a two-piece inside the hill. As that was happening, Optic was able to slay out on the right side of P2, and now they were able to gain those spawns. This is another one of those maps that as it rotates from P4 back to P1 over to P2, you basically want to hold the same spawn the entire time. So that's why I think the minimap comes up here pretty soon. But as Envy is spawning out, they're not just rushing, trying to get in that side door. They are trying to hit the right-hand side of the map so they can gain those spawns. That's exactly what you're seeing right here. So again, there's a lot of strategy that comes into play here. Optic was having these spawns, so as they're spawning here, they can get inside of P4. But remember, P1 and P2 are over here, so as it rotates throughout the next two hills, you want to maintain those spawns, which is why, as you saw Envy come up off a spawn, they were spawning on this side. Rather than just rush inside the hill, if this was Modern Warfare, if you get inside the hill, you get those kills, you're going to spawn right here, super close to the hard point, right? That's not how this game worked. So rather than try to hit that side door, they're electing to give up that time in hopes of hitting this mid cut or running through P1 and hitting a long flank to regain those spawns. If they're able to get those spawns, now as it rotates back to P1 and as it rotates to P2 on the right-hand side of the map, they can then capitalize and get the majority of the time there. So let's go ahead, let's watch how this plays out. But Yeah, Big T, and this is another thing. With the M8, it was so dominant. If you could hit your shots all 4 of those rounds in that burst up close, you could still compete and you could still win that gun battle. Whereas if you're thinking about Modern Warfare, if you had an MP5 and they had an M4 and you're within 10, 15 meters, MP5's probably going to win that gun battle no matter what, just because of how dominant that weapon is. And now the rush is back on, right? As we look at the minimap, you can see that Envy now has control of the hardpoint and they're getting those right side spawns. So if you're Optic, you're just flooding inside of P1 over and over again because you do have, now a lot of this is the same. You do have about a 60-point lead. So rather than fight for spawns, try to get the last 25 seconds inside of P1. If you're able to get it, great. If you're not, well, you still have quite the lead. Again, let's look at the rotations that's going on now. So Optic Big Timer, he's pushing the right-hand side of the map, right? He's trying to gain those spawns as it rotates over towards P2. If this was Modern Warfare and this was squad spawns, as Envy comes in, this arrow just spawned in. If this was Modern Warfare, you're going to spawn on top of your squad. This is Black Ops 2, so it's going to spawn you out. If Big Timer gets this kill here, now all of a sudden, they're going to have that right-hand side of the map. So as the game logic comes into play, they're going to think, okay, they have this right-hand side of the map, Envy spawning on the left-hand side of the map. Let's go ahead and let's spawn Optic over towards the right rather than just continue to spawn them on the rest of their teammates. We'll see how these battles turn up. Right there's the kill from Big T. There are a couple others over there, so it's not quite going to spawn them there yet. But again, right here, this is just a perfect example of how things are different. Envy has these spawns, right? They are all right here. So as it's about to rotate to P2, if this was Modern Warfare, you're going to spawn right here. This is where the rest of your spawn is. That's where it's going to spawn you. But since there are waves of Optic players coming up towards P2, they're putting pressure on that hill. So rather than spawn the latest Envy player back with the rest of his team, look at how unforgiving these spawns are. There is competition back there, right? That's about to be contested on the back right-hand side of the map. So it's not going to spawn them with the rest of them. This really does matter. Whoever wins those kills on rotations are going to get that back spawn, and it just means something, right? There are consequences. If you don't win those kills on rotation, then you're not going to get those back spawns. That's what you're seeing with this guy in the bottom left. Had that area been cleared out, then he would have spawned on top of his teammates. But since it's about to be contested, they take him and they spawn him out. It's just such a difference from what we've seen over the last year, spawning on top of each other in squad spawns, and now it's just contested. We'll see who's able to win those gun battles inside of this P2 hardpoint. And again, look at what's going on. Optic is inside the hard point, but Envy has control of the back. They have people over by gas, so it's going to take those blue arrows as they come up off of spawn, and it's spawning them out completely on the other side of the map. So again, in this game, there are consequences to either winning rotation or losing rotation. The other thing that I do want to talk about, it's not like everything was better back then. There are some things that have changed that makes the game it was a little bit worse when you were playing it back then. For example, if a hill was contested, the clock would still run no matter what. And I don't love that because you're going to see towards the end of this game here, there's 3 minutes and 50 seconds left. But towards the end of this game, if it was current, Envy would have a chance to come back because they could get inside the hard point, which would stop the clock. That's not how this game worked. So the clock just constantly ran down, which means if you had a 30-point lead and there was only 20 seconds left, there's nothing the other team could do, right? They couldn't get inside the hard point and stop the clock. So that's a great change from how it used to be to how it is now. But I just wanted to make sure that we were looking back and just showing how much different the game was overall, and why when people watched this game or when they played this game, why they favored it so much more to the way games are today. Just because it really did. First of all, in 4v4, there aren't people all over the place. That's a big thing, right? There's not you can take those 2 extra people off the map. So when you're battling for rotations, it's much more strategic, because whoever wins that rotation, we're basically winning the time inside of that hard point. So it's more strategic. You can use different weapons, right? You can use multiple SMGs. Right here, you're on board with Rambo. Rambo's using the MP7. That's a gun we haven't even talked about. We talked about the MSMC for an SMG. We talked about the Scorpion. Rambo just had an MP7. So it was more than just a 2-gun meta. You could have 5, 6 different weapons, and that's just one of it, right? It mattered if you won rotations. It mattered which weapons you used. There were more roles, fast AR, slow AR. And again, look at the mini-map. Envy currently is spawning out on the left-hand side of the map again. If they're able to get these kills and they can overtake, there's one other person. But even so, Scump gets those last 2 kills. It's still taking Envy, spawning them on the left-hand side of the map. Optic is spawning on the right-hand side of the map. That's all it takes, right? If it's contested, you're going to spawn out, no matter if there's 2 from Team A inside the hard point and 1 from Team B. It doesn't matter the numbers. If it's contested, one team's going to spawn to the left, one team's going to spawn to the right. And there's just a multitude of things that you can talk about. Right now, there's only 1:48 left, and it's a 20-point game. So as it's rotating back to P1, this becomes pretty important, right? This is another thing that comes in strategy-wise. If you're Optic, you just get in and contest and just let the clock run down. You can win because you have a 12-point lead or so. So if you're Optic right now, this isn't looking great for you, right? Because you have to get back inside the hard point, and you don't have rotations for P2. So somebody's going to have to go off. It's great that they might get the last 30 seconds inside of P1, but you do want to try to win those rotations. And the last thing to talk about is right there, you see Stainville get a 2-piece with his Hellstorm missile. You saw another one right before there. So when you really needed to get kills, or when you really needed to win time inside a hard point, you could save those kill streak that you earned from going off earlier in the game, and that could help you win time towards the latter half of the game. So right now, if you're Envy, you need to get inside of here, and you need to get another 20 points. There's only 40 seconds left, right? So contesting is the worst thing that could happen. Right there, Nate Shot gets in, Big Timer gets in, Big Timer gets a 2-piece. Right now, Optic is inside of the hard point. There are 30 seconds left. So as this lead goes up, there's almost nothing that Envy can do, right? And you're going to see that in just a second. Nice kill there but right here, it's more than a 20-point difference. So if you're Optic, you're going to see the last 15, 20 seconds, they don't even matter, right? They're standing up. They're not even playing anymore. They know that there's no way that Envy could come back. So it's over. So there are things about the new way that the game is done that's better. There are some things that are worse, but I just wanted to go back and look at a tangible example, right? Everybody talks about Black Ops 2 and how it was the greatest competitive game of all time. Why is that so? Hopefully we were able to answer that a little bit in this video. If you're new around here, this is what my channel is like. I break down gameplay. I really try to explain the ins and the outs and the strategy behind it. So if you're new, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Any comments? What did you think about this? What do you think about the spawn system, the streaks, the gun balance, all of that? Put it down below. Thank you guys so much. Leave a like. It helps out the channel. We will see you in tomorrow's upload.